Hello, welcome to Microfiche Microphone. I'm Micah, and on this channel we look at microfiche from the past, old newspaper articles in the public domain. We look at them with our modern eyes, our modern perspective, and see what we can learn from them. On this microfiche time capsule, we are looking back at the Improvement era from January 1912. And this article is entitled Orson Pratt, Apostle, Pioneer, Philosopher, Scientist, and Historian, by Orson F. Whitney of the Quorum of the 12 Apostles. So that's quite a title, yeah? So this article is about Orson Pratt. Orson Pratt was the younger brother of Parley P. Pratt. And if I'm not mistaken, I believe he had a doctorate. So he was a college professor, I wanted to say, something like that, in history, and I don't know about science, but possibly philosophy, I would also believe. So, because like the title says, Apostle, Pioneer, Philosopher, Scientist, and Historian. I don't know in what facet he was a scientist, but historian for sure. Philosopher, possibly, yeah. I know that his talks were very philosophical. He was very much a thinker. So what do I know about him? He was one of the original 12, and I believe he was the oldest living member of the original 12, if I'm not mistaken. And that is because he outlived Brigham Young. And it wasn't, because John Taylor wasn't one of the original 12. He was called after, almost immediately after, but he was called after the original 12 were set up. And I have to also apologize because I believe I said in the video on Parley P. Pratt that we'd be doing it in 2 weeks, and it's 3 afterwards because Luke Johnson and William Smith are between the two. But, but you know what I don't understand is that Orson Hyde and Orson Pratt are easy to compare to each other because they're both named Orson, and they were both part of the original 12, and, they had some things in common. But I think there were 7 articles on Orson Hyde, and there are literally dozens on Orson Pratt. This is one of many, one of several. I just found this one looked interesting to me, and that's why I decided to use this one instead of one of the other ones. But yeah, Orson Pratt apparently way more well-known or more interesting. I don't know. Maybe he had more of a general appeal than Orson Hyde. I don't know. It seems really strange to me that Orson Pratt was so much better known. It's just very interesting to me. Anyway, as far as details of his life, I mean, he had the same parents as Parley P. Pratt. And if I'm not mistaken, descended from Anne Hutchinson, who was a Puritan reformer of her day. Anyway, she was fairly well known, but so colonists, yeah, and that he had a very, very full beard, and that he was very studied, and he wrote about history. So that's most of the things I know about him. And that he outlived Brigham Young and would have been the next president if they hadn't reordered the 12 to put him behind John Taylor. So he must have left the church at some point and then come back, which I'm hoping we will learn about. But with Orson Hyde, I felt bad for him because he was the president of the Quorum of the 12 for years, and I think he barely outlived Brigham Young by literally a couple of weeks. So I don't think that was really a question anyway. But Orson Pratt lived for I think another 5 years or something like that. So, it made me feel a little bit sad that it wasn't even a question of whether or not Orson Pratt would become a president of the church, because after the reordering he was put down. But with Orson Hyde, for example, I originally was oh, I feel bad for him. But then when I read what actually happened, I was okay, yeah, I can see why they reordered him. So maybe the same will happen here. We'll see. Anyway, so let's take a look at the article. 100 years ago, in a humble village in the Empire State, 100 years ago from 1912, so 1812. A man was born, was it 100 years from his birth date? Okay, that's interesting. A man was born of whom it was said, as he lay in his casket in Salt Lake City on the 6th of October, 1881, that he had traveled more miles, preached more sermons, studied and written more upon the gospel and upon science than any other man in the church. That man was Orson Pratt, and the speaker who eulogized him was Wilford Woodruff, his fellow apostle and pioneer. There were many who knew Orson Pratt better than I, this is the author, Orson F. Whitney, but none admired or esteemed him more, and yet my knowledge of him was not based upon intimate association. I scarcely knew him in a social way, and never had the opportunity to converse with him. My acquaintance with the man was wholly of a public character, and the information I possess concerning his career is shared by tens of thousands. He was of English and Puritan descent, his father's ancestors, Lieutenant William Pratt, being among the first settlers of Hartford, Connecticut. Yeah, we went over this when we talked about Parley P. Pratt. They were brothers, so they had the same ancestry. Lieutenant Pratt's father was Reverend William Pratt of Stevenage, Hertfordshire, England. Stevenage? Orson Pratt was born at Hartford, Washington County, New York, September 19th, 1811. And this was published in January 1912, so they missed his birth date, but it's okay. His parents were Jared Pratt and his wife Charity Dixon. Orson was next to the youngest of 6 children. His elder brother Parley was destined, like himself, to become a noted preacher and writer, and one of the earliest settlers of the Rocky Mountain region. Jared Pratt was a weaver and a tiller of the soil. He had no faith in creeds or churches, but taught his children to be moral and to believe in the Bible. Orson received his first schooling at New Lebanon, Columbia County, in his native state. To that place the family moved when he was 3 or 4 years old. He was sent to school several months in each year until the spring of 1822, when he hired out as a farm boy. Whether in school or out, his studious mind was always at work, and at intervals he picked up a knowledge of arithmetic, bookkeeping, geography, grammar, and surveying. Though a frequent reader of the scriptures, he was not deeply concerned about religion until the autumn of 1829, when he began to pray fervently for the spiritual light and guidance. About a year or 2 later, elders of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints came into his neighborhood and held meetings. One of these elders was his brother, Parley P. Pratt, by whom Orson was baptized on the 19th anniversary of his birth. October of that year found him at Fayette, Seneca County, the birthplace of the church, which was then only 6 months old. While there, he met the prophet Joseph Smith and was confirmed by him a member and ordained an elder on the 1st day of November, 1830. His first mission, taken soon after, was to Colesville in Broome County. Early in 1831, he followed the fortunes of the saints to Ohio, and at Kirtland, where he presided over the elders, was ordained a high priest by Sidney Rigdon. From that time forth, he was busy traveling, preaching, and building up branches of the church. Among his converts in the eastern states were his brother Anson at Hurlgate, Long Island, Amasa M. Lyman at Bath, New Hampshire, and the Farr, Snow, and Gates families in Vermont. The thing about, counting people as your, converts, it's kind of not true, because, as they tell you when you become a missionary, you're not doing your work, you're doing God's work. So it's more of a coincidence that he taught several prominent people. So I don't find that by itself compelling, I guess. It doesn't really say anything necessarily. At Kirtland, he taught an evening grammar school and was himself a student under Professor, I cannot pronounce this guy's name, Sizas, a New York savant, who certified to his proficiency in Hebrew after a course of instruction extending through 8 weeks. So he learned Hebrew from this man who was teaching Hebrew in Kirtland, yeah? Orson Pratt helped to organize Zion's camp, and during the journey to Missouri, whither the expedition went to reinstate the Jackson County Saints upon the lands from which they had been driven by mob violence, he had charge of several wagons. When cholera broke out in camp, he was one of those attacked by it, but his great faith and iron will saved him, while others perished. In Missouri, he was a member of the High Council. At Columbus, Ohio, in April 1835, he learned that he had been chosen one of the 12 apostles, and was expected to be at Kirtland on the 26th of that month for ordination. A journey of 2 days by stagecoach enabled him to arrive there on the day appointed, and he was ordained an apostle under the hands of David Whitmer and Oliver Cowdery, 2 of the 3 witnesses to the Book of Mormon. Yeah, I've mentioned this before, but I will reiterate that the original 12 apostles were chosen by the 3 witnesses. Joseph Smith delegated that choice to those people because he didn't want anyone to think that he was biased. Alright? Anyway, I've mentioned it before, so. When the church moved from Ohio, Orson Pratt was presiding over a large branch in New York City. Summoned to Far West Missouri, which had become the headquarters of the Latter-day Saints, he was on his way there with his family and had reached St. Louis, where he was icebound, the rivers being frozen. When he learned of the expulsion of his people from that state, he rejoined them at Quincy, Illinois in the spring of 1839. Okay? During the previous summer, and while the saints were still in Missouri, the prophet, voicing the word of the Lord, had directed the apostles to take a mission to Europe, and the appointment designated the very date upon which they should leave Far West, starting from the temple lot in that city. This was before the mob troubles arose and before there was any prospect of an armed collision between Missourians and Mormons. But now all was changed. The saints had been driven out, and it was almost as much as a Mormon's life was worth to be seen in Missouri. The day set for the departure of the apostles was approaching, but they were far away, and the mob leaders were boasting that Joe Smith's prophecy concerning that event would fail. Joseph himself was a prisoner in the hands of the Missourians, as was his brother Hiram Smith, also Parley P. Pratt and other leaders. But Brigham Young, Heber C. Kimball, Orson Pratt, John Taylor, and others of the 12 were at liberty, and they determined to fulfill the prophet's prediction. Accordingly, before daybreak on the day appointed, April 26, 1839, they rode into Far West, held a meeting on the temple lot, ordained Wilford Woodruff and George A. Smith to the apostleship, and started upon their foreign mission. The enemy, meanwhile, wrapped in slumber, oblivious to what was taking place. Yeah, they did it at the crack of dawn, yeah? Delayed by the founding of Nauvoo, Illinois, and by an epidemic of fever and ague that swept over the newly settled region, the apostles did not cross the Atlantic until about a year later. Landing at Liverpool penniless and among strangers, they remained in Great Britain a little over 12 months, during which period they baptized 7,000 or 8,000 persons. Imagine that. 7,000 or 8,000? So I'm guessing it was somewhere in between, like 7,800 or something like that, and raised up branches of the church in almost every noted city and town throughout the United Kingdom. They also established a periodical, the Millennial Star, with Parley P. Pratt as editor. Yeah, we mentioned that when we talked about Parley P. Pratt. Published 5,000 copies of the Book of Mormon, 50,000 tracts, and 3,000 hymn books, besides emigrating 1,000 people to Nauvoo and founding a permanent emigration agency. The British mission had previously been opened by Heber C. Kimball and Orson Hyde, with their associates. Now its foundations were laid broad and deep. In the assignment of mission fields, Scotland fell to Orson Pratt. It had been said that a Scotchman should always be in the right, for he is hard to turn. The apostle proved the truth of the saying during his experience in and around Edinburgh, where he fasted, prayed, and preached for 9 months, succeeding, after much difficulty, in raising up a branch of more than 200 members. Well, good for him. His patient zeal never flagged. His daily climbs up the slopes of Arthur's Seat, a mountain overlooking the town, and from the summit of which he besought the God of Israel to give him the hearts of that people, is one of the picturesque episodes of Mormon missionary life. While upon this mission, he published his pamphlet, Remarkable Visions, the perusal of which drew many into the church. He returned to America early in 1841. During the next few years, he resided at Nauvoo, where he had charge of a mathematical school, and was a member of the city council. He also filled missions in the East, and at the city of Washington presented a memorial, prepared himself and others, and signed by the members of the Nauvoo City Council, praying for redress for the wrongs suffered by the saints while in Missouri. During his leisure hours, he calculated eclipses, and prepared an almanac for publication in 1845. It was entitled The Prophetic Almanac, and was calculated from the latitude and meridian of Nauvoo and other American towns. From 1836 to 1844, says the apostle, I occupied much of my leisure time in study, and made myself thoroughly acquainted with algebra, geometry, trigonometry, conic sections, differential and integral calculus, astronomy, and most of the physical sciences. These studies I pursued without the assistance of a teacher. Okay, So I don't think he did go to college, yeah? At least not at this time. He was in the East when the prophet and the patriarch was slain, and returned to Nauvoo soon after the martyrdom. I'm going to comment just very briefly on the subjects that he studied. Because I thought that he studied history, but apparently he was more into mathematics because, I actually have quite a strong mathematical background. Algebra, geometry, trigonometry, conic sections, differential and integral calculus. Those are all part of a mathematical education. And to be perfectly honest, that would get me up through maybe the first year of college. Like, honestly, that's not that impressive. Like, I don't mean to be kind of annoying about it, but, like, I'm just saying. It is impressive that he taught himself all of that, but it's not that impressive what it was that he learned. Astronomy, it depends on how deep you went into it. Like, astronomy's pretty big, as far as a field goes. Most of the physical sciences, what does that mean? You mean physics? Because that's kind of what I'm getting from this. I'm not sure. So I'm just pointing that out. I don't mean to disparage what he did. I'm just saying that what it wasn't something that I would look at and be like, oh my gosh, that's so impressive, It's more like, yeah, that's okay, The fact that he taught himself was all that's really impressive about it. But learning it itself is not that impressive. So I'm just putting that out there. Okay, the exodus of the Latter-day Saints from Illinois began in February 1846. The Mississippi River was frozen over, and some of the companies crossed on the ice. Orson Pratt, who had recently returned from another Eastern mission, was one of the leaders of this migratory movement, which was destined to redeem an arid waste and found an empire in the heart of the Great American Desert. That's a really weird way to say that. It's almost like Orson F. Whitney, who wrote the article, was kind of being like, oh, what a noble thing that just happened. It's a little bit dramatic there. And found an empire in the heart of the Great American Desert. You know what I mean? It's just very funny to me. During their slow progress over the snow-covered or rain-soaked prairies to the bluffs of the Missouri River, the Pilgrims halted many times and were even under the necessity of forming temporary settlements. Garden Grove and Mount Pisgah, at which places the leaders in council decided to send the company of pioneers to the Rocky Mountains in advance of the main body of the people. Preparations for this expedition were underway when, in the Bluffs in July 1846, the enlistment of the Mormon Battalion, 500 volunteers, as part of the United States military force then invading Mexico and her provinces, postponed the departure of the pioneers until the next season. Yeah, that was part of it, the Mormon Battalion. Orson Pratt was one of the 143 men led by President Brigham Young from the Missouri River westward during the spring and summer of 1847. Okay, so he was one of the originals, yeah? They started from the Mormon town of Winter Quarters, now Florence, Nebraska, about the middle of April, arriving in Salt Lake Valley on Saturday the 24th of July. Brother Pratt entered the valley 3 days in advance of the general arrival. Yeah, he wasn't the only one, though. There was a small group of them, but that's cool that he was one of them. It happened thus. President Young, after leaving Fort Bridger, had been attacked by mountain fever. Now, that's a real thing, okay? Rocky Mountain fever, you can Google it, it was a virus endemic to a very specific region in the Rocky Mountains, and because it was common there, people called it Rocky Mountain fever. But yeah, it's a virus, and it's not a fun one either. But it's not that bad, but it's not going to kill you bad, but yeah, you're going to get sick for a while. And under the direction of Orson Pratt, with a number of men in wagons, led the way down Echo Canyon, up East Canyon, through and over the Wasatch Mountains toward the shores of the Great Salt Lake. From the summit of Big Mountain on the 19th of July, Orson Pratt and John Brown, riding ahead of their companions, caught the first glimpse of the valley. And on the 21st, Orson Pratt and Erastus Snow, the latter a messenger from President Young, emerged from Emigration Canyon, a little south of where Fort Douglas now stands. They had a single saddle horse and were riding by turns. The day being warm, Brother Snow took off his coat and hung it loosely over the saddlebow. Missing it, he rode back toward the mountains to look for it, leaving his companion to walk on alone to the banks of City Creek. This stream then divided into two branches, one flowing south and the other west. Thus it was that Orson Pratt was the first of the pioneers to tread the site of Salt Lake City. because Brother Snow went back. Okay. That's kind of interesting. I mean, it's not the end-all and be-all of existence, but it is kind of cool, There's a picture. This says, the caption says, "The Old Pratt Observatory, formerly located on the southeast corner of Tabernacle Square, Salt Lake City, Utah. The place is now marked by 2 red sandstones, which were set by Orson Pratt and used in his observations." Observations of what? Like, were you talking about, like, nature observations? Was he using microscopes in there? Because there's no window. So maybe that was it. Other than that, I would say, like, what was he using a telescope to see the stars? You know what I mean? Like, I'm not sure what kind of observations he means. Anyway. Any other member of that historic band might have done as much had chance or destiny so decided, but how many of them could have laid out the town that was founded here that memorable summer? This honor also fell to Orson Pratt, who, assisted by Henry G. Sherwood, ran the original survey of Salt Lake City on Monday, the 2nd of August. Okay. He ascertained the altitude of the valley and determined its latitude and longitude. We are also indebted to Orson Pratt and a few men like him for what we know of the experiences of the pioneers during and after their journey to the West. Okay, so we wrote it down, yeah. But he originally did the original survey. Okay, that's kind of cool. The fact that you had to, like, that wasn't that easy back then. It's not like you had the same kind of equipment you have now. So that took some skill. From the summer of 1848 to the spring of 1851, the apostle presided over the European mission, with headquarters at Liverpool. And there's nothing in between, right? Okay, I guess that was shortly thereafter, all right. The British Isles contained at that time, according to its published statement, about 40,000 Latter-day Saints. President Pratt's reputation as speaker and writer had preceded him, and the son of his fame now rose nigh to the zenith. Orson F. Whitney, you're fine. You're a fine person, but for heaven's sake, do you have to use the flower language? Was that really necessary? As president, preacher, editor, and author, he labored almost incessantly. Every noted town in the 3 kingdoms heard of the sound of his voice, deep, sonorous, powerful, proclaiming with fervid and fearless eloquence the principles he had been sent to promulgate, the principles of the everlasting gospel. While editing the Millennial Star, he wrote, published, and distributed many pamphlets on philosophical themes, with means obtained from the sale of his works, supplied the urgent needs of a portion of his family who were still on the Iowa frontier. What was his family doing there? Okay, so they didn't come until later. All right, yeah, that's not that weird, I guess. He was visiting them in the spring of 1850 when he received word from President Young that he was honorably released from his mission and at liberty to return to Utah. But he'd said that he presided over it until the spring of 1851, so that's not right either, is it? Now, something's off there. I'll have to look that up later. In the Legislative Assembly of the territory, almost from the beginning, Orson Pratt was a member of the council, and he sat in every subsequent legislature when at home. During several sessions, he was Speaker of the House of Representatives. As one of the Corps of Instructors at the University of Deseret, now University of Utah, he delivered in the winter and spring of 1851-52 a series of 12 public lectures on astronomy, which awakened general interest. He had now achieved fame in the field of higher mathematics, having discovered, in November 1850, a law governing planetary rotation, and subsequently making other scientific discoveries. Really? I'm interested to know what law of planetary rotation. That's really interesting. Professor Proctor, the astronomer, while lecturing at Salt Lake City early in the 80s, referred almost reverently to Professor Pratt, expressing the opinion that there were but 4 real mathematicians in the world, and that Orson Pratt was one of them. I'm sorry, but like I said, the mathematics they mentioned, either the author knows nothing at all about mathematics, and so didn't list more than he was familiar with, which is about the beginning of college mathematics, or Orson Pratt didn't either. Like, it's one or the other. I don't know. I'm guessing that it's the author that didn't know about it, especially if somebody else said that he was one of the real mathematicians of the world. He was such an ardent lover of knowledge and so anxious to disseminate it that he offered to teach the youth of the community free if they would give their time to study. Yeah, that's cool. In August 1852, he took up a temporary residence in Washington, D.C., where he published The Seer, a periodical devoted to the dissemination of Mormon doctrines. In its columns appeared the Revelation on Plural Marriage and Joseph Smith's Prophecy on War. At the same time, he presided over the Latter-day Saints in all the states of the Union and in the adjoining British provinces. Then followed another presiding mission in the Great Britain, from which he returned by way of California, while Johnston's army, sent to Utah to put down an imaginary rebellion, was in winter quarters east of the Wasatch Mountains. Okay, so that was the Mormon War, yeah? 1857, I believe that was. And so he returned by way of California. That's kind of out of his way, is it not? Wouldn't you have to sail all the way around South America to get... Because if you're going to Utah through California, like, yeah, you would have to. You'd have to go months out of your way. And was it really worth it for that? I guess it's possible he took a different route cross-country, like through Arizona, for example, and then came back up through California? I'm slightly confused about the geography of that. It's going west to go east, but I guess if it works, you know. The spring of 1864 found the apostle at Vienna, endeavoring to obtain a foothold for missionary work in the Austrian capital. But the laws of that country were too stringent for such an undertaking, and he, with his companion, Elder William W. Reiter, returned to England. Why does that sound super familiar? Like somebody else did it. Like, you know... Who was it that... Was it Parley P. Pratt? I feel like it might have been. I can't remember exactly. But somebody... Like, this exact thing was mentioned when we talked about somebody else. And so I'm wondering how many people were actually there. I'll have to Google that later. There, President Pratt published in May 1866 an edition of his mathematical work, Pratt's Cubic and Biquadratic Equations. Okay. 3 years later, in New York City, he transcribed and published the Book of Mormon in the phonetic characters of the Deseret alphabet. I've talked about this as well. The Deseret alphabet was a phonetic alphabet, which by itself is not a bad idea to make, but why in the world would you publish whole books in it? It's just weird. It's a very strange idea to me. August 1870 was made memorable by a great public discussion in Salt Lake Tabernacle, where Orson Pratt, the Mormon apostle, debated with Dr. John P. Newman, Methodist preacher and chaplain of the United States Senate. The question, does the Bible sanction polygamy? The debate lasted 3 days and was listened to by 10,000 people. The umpires chosen by both parties rendered no decision, that being one of the preliminary conditions, but it was the general verdict of Mormons and Gentiles that while Newman was the more eloquent, ornately so at least, Pratt was the better informed, and the more logical. Okay. Both men were thorough scriptorians, and the apostle surprised even his learned opponent by his profound knowledge of the original Hebrew, and his clear-cut mathematical demonstrations. The Boston Banner of Light, commenting on the results, said, "Someone carrying more guns than Dr. Newman will have to be sent out missionarying among the Mormons." That's funny because he was one of the best people in the country, right? So it's not like they could send someone better. That's really funny that they're like, you have to be better than that, you know? In 1874, Orson Pratt became the church historian, an office held by him during the remainder of his days. In 1877, he went to England to transcribe and publish an edition of the Book of Mormon in the Pitman phonetic characters, but was recalled almost immediately by the death of President Brigham Young. Yeah, so once again, why would you publish a whole book in phonetic characters? Like, it's hard to read. The ensuing autumn found him revisiting scenes of early Mormon history in company with his fellow apostle Joseph F. Smith. Revisiting early... Okay. December of that year brought another mission, the last one undertaken by this valiant veteran in the cause of Christ. It was his 15th voyage over the ocean, this time to stereotype and publish at Liverpool the Book of Mormon and the Doctrine and Covenants, as arranged by him in paragraphs, with footnotes and references. Good for him. The original footnotes and references were pretty rudimentary, but we had a whole team working on them since then under Thomas and Smonson. But like, if Orson Pratt did the original ones, that's impressive, yeah. He also published while there his astronomical work, Key to the Universe. In London, he made a discovery regarding the Great Pyramid of Egypt. What was it? A discovery conclusively demonstrating to his mind that the date of the organization of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints symbolized in the chronological floor line of the Grand Gallery in the ancient monument. Oh gosh, I've read this talk. He gave a talk in General Conference on it, and it's really quite funny. He was like convinced that it predicted down to like the year what date the church should be organized. And it's a stretch. It's one of those kind of conspiracy theory ideas that you're just like, you know, there are a certain number of steps within the pyramid, and therefore, if you count that to be years, then it's like this many years since the pharaohs were living, which was this many years, and then if you add them up, and then it's going to be this exact date. Yeah, it's one of those. You're like, I don't think they had that in mind when they built it. I'm just saying. I mean, I could be wrong, but you know. The apostle was now advanced in years, almost upon the summit of his 70. His appearance was truly patriarchal, hair and beard being white as snow. Powerful in build, though of but medium stature, he was still physically and mentally strong. During the whole period of his final mission, ending in September 1879, he worked for weeks at a stretch, not less than 18 hours out of the 24. The enfeebled state of his health after his return showed that the heavy labor had told severely upon him. Okay, that was kind of odd wording, so I was trying to follow that. Okay, so he worked really, really hard in his last mission, September 1879. He came back kind of in poor health because he had worked so hard. Okay, that's what I got from that. 2 years later, on the 3rd day of October, he died at his home in Salt Lake City. Just before breathing his last, he dictated to President Joseph F. Smith, who took down the words as the dying man uttered them, this epitaph, to be placed upon his tombstone. My body sleeps for a moment, but my testimony lives and shall endure forever. Okay, I like that. The St. Paul of Mormondom, as Tullidge styles him, was a preacher eloquent and powerful, a theologian learned and profound, a linguist to whom dead languages were an open book, a writer lucid and logical, a scientist of eminent attainments, essentially a sage, having the philosophical temperament as well as the philosophical cast of mind. He might easily have been classed with the wise men of Greece, or even with the Hebrew prophets. The philosophical side of his nature may be illustrated by an anecdote. One of the evidences of the humble circumstances in which he lived was a weather-beaten, though respectable, straw hat which he wore both summer and winter. Okay, one day his daughter, Mrs. Joseph Kimball, asked him, "Father, why do you wear a straw hat in winter?" "To keep my head warm," he answered. "But," she persisted, "is a straw hat warm in winter?" "Warmer than no hat at all, my daughter," was the reply, worthy of a Diogenes. Why in the world is that worthy of a Diogenes? No, that is like dad humor, basically. Like, gosh, I don't know. That's just silly. It was just a silly thing he said that wasn't particularly intelligent. Gosh, having them say that as if it was like the smartest thing ever that anybody could have said, like, it's just silly. Another incident tells something of his power of concentration and his ability to control his feelings, all the more remarkable when it is known that Orson Pratt was as highly spirited as he was fearless and determined. He was preaching at Liverpool in the open air when a noisy fellow, pushing his way through the crowd and planting himself squarely in front, began to denounce him. The speaker, without deigning to notice the interruption, raised his stentorian voice, and going right on with his discourse, poured forth a volume of sound that completely drowned the voice of his would-be disturber. The fellow then shouted his objections, but the apostle, still further increasing his own lung power, again rendered the tones of the hoodlum inaudible. This was kept up until the latter ceased from sheer exhaustion and retired amid the laughter of the bystanders. The orator then lowered his voice to normal pitch and continued his subject to the end. Okay, he just got louder and louder. That's good, though. That means he has a very good projection of his voice, yeah? Orson Pratt stood at the head of a patriarchal household, the husband of several wives and father of 45 children. 32 of whom, evenly divided as to sons and daughters, survived him. Many of these are present today. His direct descendants, children, grandchildren, and great-grandchildren now number nearly 400. That was in 1912. It was a foregone conclusion that with a family so large and a life so devoted to the public interest, he could hardly have died wealthy, even if he had so desired. Okay. But it is exceedingly doubtful that he ever cherished such a desire. Had he been asked the question, once put to Agassiz, why not use your ability to acquire a fortune, he would probably have answered, as did the greatest naturalist, I haven't the time. Yeah, it's probably true. He may have lacked the gift. Be it so, perhaps he had other gifts just as great and even greater. The mind must be fed as well as the body. That's a really weird thing to say. I'm sorry, Orson? Whitney? Like, why are you saying it like that? He may have lacked the gift. Be it so, perhaps he had other gifts just as great or even greater. You've been talking about how intelligent he is the whole time. And maybe he wasn't terribly business-oriented, and that's fine. But, like, to say, oh, he may have lacked the gift... or maybe the interest? You know what I mean? I don't know. Like, it's not a very kind way of wording that. Like, he might have just not been very talented. See what I mean? Like, that's basically what you're saying. Ugh. The mind must be fed as well as the body. Man shall not live by bread alone, and he who ministers to the intellect and the spirit is, and ought to be, as consequential in any community as the capitalist, the businessman, the politician, the executive, whose skill is in governing men, or acquiring and managing property, and ministering to the physical needs of his fellows. Okay, Orson F. Whitney just went off on a tangent there. I'm hoping it comes back to Orson Pratt. It may yet transpire that the true mission of the man of affairs is one of his functions, at least, is to free such men as Orson Pratt from the excess of business cares and burdens and give them time to devote to other pursuits, just as important and quite as useful in the long run as those which the many most appreciate. Doubtless there were times when this man found it difficult to provide for his family the bread that perishes. One reason was that, like his great master, our elder brother, he had to be about his father's business, feeding a starving world with the bread of eternal life. Okay. Moving on. I sincerely hope so. This is one of the things that annoys me about Orson F. Whitney. No offense to this man, but for heaven's sake, get to the flippin' point. Ugh, I'm sorry. Why should any man assume... Oh gosh, it's going to keep going, isn't it? Okay, I'm going to get through this as quickly as possible. Why should any man assume, be he writer, preacher, or financier, that his ability was given for his own exclusive benefit, and his neighbor's ability for the benefit of the public? No gift from God was ever intended for self-aggrandizement. All such endowments are altruistic in purpose and were designed for mutual help in the general good. Nor should aptitude in any direction be rated as its mere market value. Men pay most, as a rule, for things of least consequence. The gifts of the gospel, which are not to be purchased, which are beyond all price, would be discontinued in any market in the world. Those who despise any of God's gifts are fit subjects for the divine clemency. They should be forgiven, for they know not what they do. All kinds of good men are needed in the work of the Lord, and someday, under a better social system than now prevails, they will be found laboring every man in the interest of his neighbor, and doing all things with an eye single to the glory of God. Without purse or scrip, that was the insignia of the apostolic mission, and he who gave that mission had not... Oh gosh, he's still going. Had not where to lay his head. Not that he was powerless to provide for himself and his friends, for he possessed all things, for he made his servants poor, and that the world might be proved, and the Lord's true disciples known. He who gives even a cup of cold water to a servant who got athirst shall in no wise lose his reward. The American nation, the whole civilized world, or a great part of it, has gone money mad, grasping for gold and caring little or nothing as to how they acquire it, marrying for money, stealing for money, killing for money, anything to get money. Put money in thy purse seems to be the slogan of the present hour, which may be well enough as to the money honestly obtained, if more people were found willing to open their purses, take the money out again, and use it as the divine giver intended it to be used. How much is he worth in dollars and cents, and what is his capacity for making and keeping? Is too often the gauge of a man's greatness in these modern times, a false standard unworthy of a great nation, a great people. What a predicament the world would be in if our Heavenly Father should act upon that principle. God's greatness is shown not so much by his ability to create and possess as by his willingness to bestow, to give, to share, to minister in the welfare and happiness of his children, to provide ways and means for their advancement, opening for them the avenues of progress leading to the summits of glory which he himself has attained. And he expects us to be like him, to emulate his example, and to be perfect even as he is perfect according to our sphere. Thank heaven there are some men and women who bow not down to the God of gold, men and women who are not for sale, men and women with whom the giver, not the gift, is supreme. Such a man was the prophet Joseph Smith. Such were his associates and successors. Such men lead us today, and such are all true Latter-day Saints the world over. Here we go. Such a man was Orson Pratt, a true and genuine apostle. A rich man, as President John Taylor said President John Taylor at his funeral. Yes, for he that hath eternal life is rich. Eternal riches was his quest. In moderate, even lowly circumstances, so far as this world's wealth was concerned, he was rich in powers of mind and accumulations of knowledge, an intellectual and a spiritual millionaire. Gosh, he finally got to the point. That literally was 2 full pages of nothing but philosophy about money. And like talents as far as like accumulating money. Orson Whitney, calm down. Gosh, this literally could have been 150 words shorter. Possibly even 200. Because that's a long speech about the philosophy of money. So funny. Okay, but that's the end of that article. Kind of thank goodness, okay? Orson F. Whitney, calm down. I think I'm going to say this a couple of times when I get to him. He's flowery. He's flowery. He likes to talk. Yes, he does. And philosophize. Gets off topic sometimes, yes? Anyways, Orson Pratt. Speaking of coming back to topic. Another couple of things that I remembered while we were reading the article is that there was a time, I'm pretty sure he was responsible for having published the first book, The History of Joseph Smith by his mother. Yeah? The problem was that Brigham Young was not happy about that because Orson Pratt just did it. He didn't ask for permission, he just did it. And Brigham Young was kind of mad at him about it. Another thing is that they didn't actually mention him apostatizing at any point. So I'm wondering why it was that he was reordered after John Taylor. Yeah? Why wasn't he the next president of the church after Brigham Young? Have to look that one up. I feel like this article didn't want to mention anything negative. And so maybe that's why neither of those things were mentioned. But yeah, like those are both good points. Those are important points, you know what I mean? Anyway, let's do some fact checking. So I have recently been spoken to about, well, I guess it was not spoken to so much as written to in the comments that why I use Wikipedia as a source. Again, I've mentioned this probably 15 times, but to reiterate, I use Wikipedia as a source because Wikipedia is is a free source that has nearly infinite amount of information. Okay, not infinite, but has a lot of information and it's generally well sourced. Anyone can edit it, it is true. However, there are moderators who are very strict on using sources and not just randomly editing things and adding and subtracting things. It's actually quite a very good source of information. If you want the original sources, they're all listed at the bottom. So, and I have actually edited a couple of articles in the past because church history is kind of a niche interest and sometimes some of the more obscure things were incorrectly cited. One of them, for example, was, I can't remember who it was, I'd have to look it up, but there was one of the apostles in the late 19th century who were called, I believe it was in 1897, and it said on his Wikipedia page that he was called in 1896. And when I checked in the General Conference talks, he was first brought forward in 1897. I'm telling you, it's wrong, yeah? And I looked and I'm like, where in the world did they get 1896? And so I cited my source and I made the change, and now it is correct in there. Now says 1897. So that, you know, that was one example. So sometimes you can find mistakes. But here on this channel, this is a YouTube channel. This is not a scientific article. If I were writing a scientific article with citations and everything, I would include original citations and I would not cite Wikipedia. However, this is a YouTube channel. This is for entertainment purposes only, and therefore, I consider Wikipedia good enough. Yeah? And if you want to read the sources, feel free. I'm not stopping anyone from reading anything. I am simply sharing my opinion. All right, now I sincerely hope that they get deeper into what kind of mathematics he did, and also if he had any sort of education in his background, because they didn't mention it. They didn't mention him going to college or even to a school, really. So, I mean, except that he studied at the School of Prophets, but that's about it. So I would really, really like them to be more explicit as to his education and some other things in that nature, yeah? All right, Orson Pratt Sr. He also had a son that he named after himself, who was Orson Pratt Jr., so in case you were wondering, but he did not have a middle name. Orson Pratt Sr., September 19th, 1811 to October 3rd, 1881, was an American religious leader and mathematician who was an original member of the Quorum of the 12 Apostles of the Church of Jesus Christ, Latter-day Saints. After the succession crisis, Pratt continued in the Quorum of the 12 of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, LDS Church, and was a leading Mormon theologian and writer until his death. Church membership and service. Pratt was born in Hartford, New York, the son of Jared Pratt and Charity Dickinson. He was the younger brother of Parley P. Pratt, who introduced him to the LDS Church and baptized him on Orson's 19th birthday, September 19, 1830, in Canaan, New York. Pratt was ordained an elder several months later, on December 1, 1830, by Joseph Smith, and immediately set out for Colesville, New York, his first mission. This was the first of a number of short missions in which Pratt visited New York, Ohio, Missouri, and the eastern states. On February 2, 1832, he was ordained a high priest by Sidney Rigdon. Then he continued his missions, preaching in Pennsylvania, New York, New Jersey, Vermont, New Hampshire, Connecticut, and Massachusetts. Pratt was a member of the original Quorum of the 12 Apostles, called in 1835 under the direction of Joseph Smith. He was ordained to this position on April 26, 1835. He served as a member of the mission of the 12 Apostles to the British Isles. Between 1839 and 1841, he contributed to the mission by preaching in Scotland and producing an early missionary's tract, an interesting account of several remarkable visions, and the late discovery of ancient American records. This tract contains the earliest known public printing of an account of Smith's first vision, and also contains material similar to that later published as the 1842 Articles of Faith. Okay. Very cool, very cool. I like it. On his return to America in 1841, Pratt found the church membership in contention over several issues. Rumors and gossip were rife in Nauvoo, Illinois, and Pratt found the religious principle of plural marriage difficult to accept. He rebelled against Joseph Smith when a report by disaffected Mormon John C. Bennett accused Smith of proposing marriage to Pratt's wife, Sarah Pratt, which Smith denied. Okay! Sarah also claimed that Smith had proposed, and Pratt believed his wife. Okay, after days of Smith and the other members of the 12 remonstrating with Pratt, they decided that he would not yield, and thus Pratt was excommunicated on August 20th, 1842. That explains the reordering, yeah. Bennett claimed that Joseph approached Sarah while Orson was on a mission and solicited her to be one of his spiritual wives. To counteract these allegations, Joseph Smith compiled a pamphlet of affidavits, certificates, and letters which proved his innocence and Bennett's guilt concerning sexual misconduct. This includes affidavits produced by non-Mormon Sheriff Jacob B. Backenstoes and Sarah's erstwhile landlords, Stephen Goddard and Jeruiah Goddard. Pratt reconciled with Smith a few months after the falling out and requested rebaptism. Pratt was reinstated in the Quorum of the 12 Apostles on January 20th, 1843. Okay, that was really interesting. See, why didn't they mention this? Gosh. Orson F. Whitney, get your facts straight. See, that's really interesting. So what it sounds like to me, it sounds like John C. Bennett went to Sarah Pratt and proposed for Joseph Smith, claiming that Joseph had told him to. That's what it sounds like to me, since Sarah said that he did. Huh. Yeah, I could understand why Orson Pratt would be upset about that. Like, wouldn't you? I would. Yeah. It's not okay. Conflict with Brigham Young. After the death of Joseph Smith, Pratt was among the apostles that supported the leadership of Brigham Young, who determined to move his followers from Nauvoo to the Salt Lake Valley, where the LDS Church became established. Not only did Pratt support Young's leadership after Smith's death, but he also was instrumental in gaining the support of the general body of the church. As an apostle under Young's leadership, Pratt tended to disagree with him on a variety of topics, but found little support from the other apostles. Yes, I noticed that. On the other hand, however, he was also one of the ones asked to give the most detailed doctrinal talks. That he was given like the most difficult subjects to speak on in conference. One of them being the public revelation of polygamy, the practice of polygamy in 1852. Yep, it's a very interesting talk, too. Young expressed an appreciation for Pratt's ability to preach, but added regrettably that Pratt preached false doctrine more often than not. A few examples of conflicts with Young included opposition by Pratt to reestablishing a first presidency in 1847, the legalization of slavery in Utah Territory in 1852, and Young's Adam God teachings. Yeah, that's a weird one. But I've read that talk, and it is weird. Young also opposed Pratt's teachings that the one God of the Bible was a matrix of attributes shared by many individuals who had achieved exaltation to godhood. Yeah, I think they're both wrong. Yeah, and when you're both wrong and you get in doctrinal, arguments about it. Brigham Young attempted to minimize Pratt's influence. He did so by sending him away on numerous missions. Yeah, but, is that not a bad way of, minimizing your influence? Because then you're going to be very influential over the people you convert, yeah? Further, Pratt's brief period of excommunication from the church had long-term consequences. When dealing with seniority in the council after the death of Joseph Smith, Young ruled that if a council member had been disciplined and removed from the council, his seniority was based on the date of readmission. By this ruling, both Apostle Orson Hyde and Pratt were moved down in seniority in June 1875. Yeah, it felt very pointed at the two of them. It really did when it happened. It was but they both could have been the next president of the church because they were both part of the original 12 and they both lived longer than Brigham Young. They outlived him. So it's interesting. It felt very pointed at the time. I noticed that as well. This ensured that neither would become president of the LDS Church. Even with these conflicts, Brigham Young refused to try Pratt for his fellowship in the church, an indication of how Young was willing to tolerate differences of opinion on theological issues. Interesting. Whoever wrote this, apparently is a fan of Brigham Young, I guess. It's a strange, interesting wording, but that is true, but that's because Orson Pratt didn't do anything wrong, so I feel like that's just the right thing to do. So I'm not sure why they would, specify that. He's willing to tolerate differences of opinion. Well, sort of. I mean, he kept, I don't know, he made some changes specifically so that he wouldn't be in charge, so, I don't know. After Young's death, Pratt's interpretations and opinions held more influence over the other apostles and later church leaders. Yeah, they did. Of course, he only lived for another, 5 years, yeah? Not even. I think it was 4.5. Missionary service. After settling in Salt Lake Valley with the Mormon pioneers, Pratt was called to return to Europe as a mission administrator between 1848 and 1851, during which time he also served as editor of the Millennial Star. Okay, I think his original call was from 1848 to 1851, and then he only stayed until 1850 because that's when he was released, kind of unexpectedly. In 1850, a mission president of the British mission, Pratt told his missionaries his strategy for spreading the gospel in an article titled, "How to Warn the Whole British Nation in 1 Year." Although this goal was not achieved, by the end of the year there were twice as many LDS church members residing in Britain as in the United States. That's a lot. As a mission president, Pratt was admired by the missionaries for the many logical and well-written pamphlets he wrote and published while he was there, and the way he communicated with British intellectuals to discuss theology. Okay, once again, I haven't heard any sign that he had any higher education. While presiding over this mission, Pratt received a pamphlet from Lorenzo Snow entitled "The Voice of Joseph" that Snow wanted translated into French to advance his missionary efforts in northern Italy. Pratt managed to make contacts with people in Paris who were willing to do this translation. Okay. In 1865, Pratt was one of the first Mormon missionaries to work in Austria. Traveling with William W. Reiter, he was there for 9 months but did not baptize anyone. The missionaries were eventually expelled by the Austrian government, yeah. They probably weren't baptized because they didn't want to deal with the government's issues with them. Migration west. When news reached Pratt that the LDS Church was moving westward, he said, "We do not want one saint to be left in the United States." He helped lead the saints out of Babylon. Pratt was a member of Young's initial pioneer company, the Vanguard Company, that crossed the plains to select a western site for the Mormon colonization. His journals of this trip are an important Mormon history resource. As the group made their way from Illinois to Utah, Pratt acted as the company's scientific observer. He made regular readings with the company's scientific instruments, took notes on geological formations and mineral resources, and recorded information on plants and animals. He described snow on Laramie Peak on June 7th, and noted that rock was found on June 10th would make excellent grindstones, being a fine grit sandstone. As a mathematician, Pratt assisted company scribe William Clayton in the design and invention of a rhodometer, a version of the modern odometer. Okay, yeah. Intended to compute the distance traveled per day, the design consisted of a set of wooden cogwheels attached to the hub of a wagon wheel, with the mechanism counting the revolutions of the wheel. The apparatus was built by carpenter Appleton Milo Harmon and was first used on the morning of May 12, 1847. With Erastus Snow, Pratt entered the Salt Lake Valley on July 21, 1847, 3 days ahead of the main body of the Vanguard Company. Several days later, he preached the first sermon in the Salt Lake Valley and formally dedicated the valley to the Lord. Yep. Alright. Family and polygamy. Some sources agree that Pratt married 7 women and was the father of 45 children, though other sources, including his first wife Sarah, claim that he married 10 women. That's interesting. So several of them were, secret. At age 57, Orson Pratt married his 10th wife, 16-year-old Margaret Graham. Pratt and all his wives and children struggled with poverty, likely because Brigham Young constantly set Pratt on missions. Yeah. Orson F. Whitney did mention that in a whole philosophical discourse about, not being good with money. Still, Pratt was able to support himself and his family by writing and publishing pamphlets on Mormon theology. Some of his wives also earned money by selling hats, fabrics, and other goods. On August 29, 1852, Orson Pratt delivered a sermon that taught the principle of polygamy, discussing the blessings of raising many children up in the LDS Church. This was the first time the practice was discussed openly in the church. Okay. Raising children? Oh, polygamy. Yeah. In August 1852, that's right. I mentioned that earlier. Okay, sorry. In June 1870, Pratt participated in a debate against John P. Newman on whether or not the Bible supported polygamy. He defended the practice in his writings for The Seer and throughout his ministry, gaining the title the Apostle of Polygamy. Ooh, that might end up on the thumbnail. Okay. List of wives. Sarah Miranda Bates, Charlotte Bishop, Adelia Ann Bishop, Mary Ann Merrill, Sarah Louisa Chandler, Marion Ross, Juliet Ann Phelps, Eliza Crooks, Sarah Louise Lewis, and Margaret Graham. 1842, polygamy scandal in relationship with Sarah Pratt. Okay. In 1886, Pratt's wife Sarah Pratt claimed in an interview that, while in Nauvoo, Illinois, that Joseph Smith was attracted to her and intended to make her one of his spiritual wives, while Pratt was in England on missionary service. To Smith's proposal, Sarah replied that she would never break her marriage covenant with Orson, and that she did not believe in Smith's revelation regarding plural marriage. She issued an ultimatum to Smith: "Joseph, if you ever attempt anything of this kind with me again, I will tell Mr. Pratt on his return home." After Pratt returned from England, Sarah later claimed another incident occurred between her and Smith at her home. Sarah Pratt's neighbor, Mary Etty V. Smith, reported that Sarah ordered the prophet out of the house, and the prophet used obscene language to her, claiming that he had found John C. Bennett in bed with her. Ooh, did he? Because John C. Bennett slept around all over the place. Wow. Well, maybe he did. Whoa. Oh gosh. According to Bennett, another incident where Joseph Smith tried to kiss Sarah caused her to tell her husband about the whole incident. I'm sorry, this is shady. It sounds like John C. Bennett was coming on to her, and maybe or may not have succeeded. Gosh. And then Joseph Smith found out about it, and so they decided to disparage Joseph Smith because of that. That's what it sounds like to me. Pratt was torn between believing his wife or Smith. He wrote, "My sorrows are greater than I can bear." Pratt then took Sarah's side and confronted Smith, who denied Sarah's allegations and responded that she was John C. Bennett's lover. I didn't know it went that far. Interesting. The resulting estrangement between Smith and Pratt, who stood by Sarah in preference to the denials of Smith, led to Smith warning Pratt that if Pratt did believe his wife and follow her suggestions, he would go to hell. Wow, that's pretty strong. In the local and Mormon press, Sarah Pratt was accused of having an adulterous relationship, not with Smith, but with John C. Bennett, and several affidavits were printed in local and pro-Mormon Nauvoo publications, including the leading councils of the church and from others such as Jacob B. Backenstoss, a relative of the sheriff of Hancock County, though many of the allegations are believed to be falsified. Orson Pratt attempted to commit suicide in 1842. Oh gosh. At the time, Apostle Wilford Woodruff stated that Dr. John Cook Bennett was the ruin of Orson Pratt. Wow. Oh, he was set up. That's so sad. A public meeting was held where a resolution supporting Smith's character was proposed. Pratt stated that he was unable to support the resolution, to which Smith replied, "Have you personally a knowledge of any immoral act in me toward the female sex or in any other way?" Pratt answered no, but he became estranged from the church and Smith. Brigham Young, Heber C. Kimball, and George A. Smith spent several days trying to get Pratt to believe Smith, but Pratt continued to side with his wife. Finally, the three apostles excommunicated Pratt from the church. Sarah was not excommunicated at this time. Why not? She committed adultery. Gosh. Both Orson and Sarah were rebaptized by Joseph Smith when they returned to the church in 1843. Orson did not ever consider himself truly excommunicated, and neither, by one interpretation, did Smith. Okay, because it wasn't doctrinal? Was that the reason? Bennett claimed that Pratt and his wife were planning to leave Nauvoo and help him expose Mormonism, but Pratt published a statement in the October 1st, 1842 Nauvoo Wasp to deny this claim. Pratt soon returned to the church and denounced Bennett. Okay, so he flipped around and he spoke against John C. Bennett afterwards, okay. Van Wagoner cites a letter written by Pratt's brother, Parley P. Pratt, which said that Orson was a part of the church and that Bennett's book, The History of the Saints, was written solely to get vengeance on those who had excommunicated him and barely worth mentioning. Pratt wrote a postscript to his brother's letter. J.C. Bennett has published lies concerning myself and family and the people with which I am connected. Smith and Pratt directly discussed Pratt's wife, with Smith stating to him, "She lied about me. I never made the offer which she said I did," after which Joseph suggested he divorce Sarah and start a new family. Pratt did not divorce Sarah at that time, though one source does report that Orson came to believe that Sarah had lied about Smith's proposal. This event would impact the couple for the rest of their lives. They eventually did divorce, though decades later. Sarah secretly encouraged her children not to believe in Mormon teachings. She and her son, Orson Pratt Jr., eventually apostatized from the church. Okay. Wow. You know, it's so funny. It's always the people who do wrong who point towards other people and claim that they did wrong. It's so ironic. Like, it's always the people who have something to hide themselves who claim that somebody else does. Alright. But, that was very descriptive and very thorough. Like, I feel like I don't need to go deeper into that or, even state an opinion. I've already said it. It sounds like John C. Bennett and Sarah Pratt had an affair and that they were trying to cover it up by disparaging Joseph Smith and saying that it was him that tried to have an affair with her. Yeah, okay. Writer, historian, and philosopher. While in Illinois, Pratt acted as an instructor of mathematics at the University of Nauvoo. Makes sense, he's probably better at mathematics than most of the people there. In Utah, Pratt's strong skills in analysis and writing led Young to assign him to produce sermons and pamphlets dealing with religious topics. Pratt wrote 16 pamphlets in defense of LDS church doctrines, drawing on the works of Joseph Smith and his brother Parley P. Pratt. These include Divine Authority, or the question, was Joseph Smith sent of God? In 1848, and Divine Authenticity of the Book of Mormon in 1850 and 1851. His pamphlet, An Interesting Account of Several Remarkable Visions, was the first published account of the first vision, and included a list of beliefs that is similar to Smith's 1842 Articles of Faith. In Absurdities of Immaterialism, Pratt defended the Mormon doctrine of materiality with reference to science, philosophy, and theology. As part of his system of Mormon theology, Pratt embraced the philosophical doctrine of hylozoism? Hylozoism is a philosophical doctrine according to which all matter is alive or animated, either in itself or as participating in the action of a superior principle, usually the world soul. The theory holds that matter is unified with life or spiritual activity. Huh. So, like, everything has a spirit, basically, like, including, like, trees and plants and rocks and stuff. Okay. Although these materials were primarily used in the mission field, Pratt was also a church spokesman on the topic of plural marriage. Yes, he absolutely was. At a special conference in Salt Lake City in August 1852, Pratt publicly preached a sermon announcing the doctrine of plural marriage. He later published an essay in defense of the practices of 12 monthly installments of the church periodical The Seer. Okay, which provides the most complete defense of the Mormon doctrine during this period. Pratt himself is considered one of the most influential early apologists for the LDS Church. Pratt's views were not always without controversy. In 1865, a majority of the First Presidency and the Quorum of the 12 Apostles of the LDS Church officially condemned some of Pratt's doctrinal writings, including some of his articles from the Seer. They considered it to be misleading and questionable in relation to the actual doctrine of the Church. Though his many controversial beliefs have been rejected by Brigham Young and other church leaders, Pratt's writings have nevertheless influenced many modern Mormon beliefs, including their concept of God and the doctrine of the gathering of Israel. In 1869, Pratt transliterated a portion of the Book of Mormon into the Deseret alphabet. Pratt acted as church historian and recorder from 1874 until his death. He edited many church periodicals and helped divide editions of the Book of Mormon and Doctrine and Covenants into verses and provided footnoted cross-references. He served 7 terms as Speaker of the House in the Utah Legislature. Okay. Science publications and lectures. So let's see if it's actually science or if it's mathematics. Pratt was known as an accomplished mathematician and had a strong interest in astronomy, and that's science, I guess. The disciplines combined with others to form in his mind a philosophy of what might be called early Mormon cosmology. He offered science-based lectures on these topics to early Mormon audiences in Utah and published 2 related books. New and Easy Method of Solution of the Cubic and Biquadratic Equations, we mentioned that one, was published in 1866, and A Key to the Universe was published in 1879. The former is claimed to have been used as a textbook in England, Germany, and France, as Pratt was known as a talented mathematician even outside of Mormon circles. In October 1851, Orson Pratt taught mathematics in the parent school of the University of Deseret. The 13th Ward Schoolhouse was used for a classroom. On December 15, 1851, he commenced a series of lectures on astronomy and its religious implications in the Council House. These educational efforts technically were part of an adult education program. Oh, okay. Well, that's interesting, yeah? List of published works. An interesting account of several remarkable visions, 1842, yeah? Absurdities of Immaterialism, 1849. Cubic and Biquadratic Equations, 1866. A Key to the Universe, 1866. The Bible and Polygamy, 1870. Death. At age 70, Orson Pratt, the last surviving member of the original Quorum of the 12 Apostles, that's what I said, died as if in gentle slumber on his couch, surrounded by family members at his home in Salt Lake City. Diabetes, according to one Dr. Castle, was the cause of death. In the year or so preceding his death, though Pratt's diabetes rendered him feeble and often unable to leave his room, he recovered enough to express to a congregation gathered in the Salt Lake Tabernacle only days before his death that he desired to live on and again lift up his voice as a missionary to the nations of the earth. Yeah, sounds like him, yeah? See also a list of people with the most children at Quorum of the 12. Oh gosh. Okay, a bunch of references. Sources. There's a whole bunch of sources. I will list them on the screen here so that you can take a look at them if you would like to. And once again, I consider those reasonable sources. Those are published articles or published books. So if you have anything that you would like to look into more thoroughly, then feel free to look at any of those sources. Yeah. Anyways, I found that absolutely fascinating. I still don't hear anywhere that he went to college himself. So it feels like he was mostly self-taught in all fields of mathematics and in astronomy. So it wasn't history. I honestly thought it was history, and I think it was because he was church historian that I thought that. So, I guess my bad on that point. I didn't realize he was a mathematician. Yeah, as far as branch of mathematics, by quadratic equations, it sounds like he was in analysis or possibly differential equations, which is interesting. Yeah, so anyone is interested in that, that's what it sounds like to me. So from a mathematical perspective, that's what I think he studied, but I'm not 100% sure because I guess he didn't study, so I guess that's what he looked into, what he taught himself. Yeah, Orson Pratt. It was a very, very interesting person, and I think that he has so many articles written on him because he was so prolific, yeah? And he really was the expert on polygamy. He was always talking about it. Probably once every couple of years he was asked to give another talk on polygamy, on plural marriage, or however it was that they worded it at the time. But let me read really quickly the August 1852 talk that they cited several times. This is the first public talk on polygamy. It's called Celestial Marriage, a discourse by Elder Orson Pratt. So I'm just going to read the first part of it. Yeah? It is quite unexpected to me, brethren and sisters, to be called upon to address you this forenoon, and still more so to address you upon the principle which has been named, namely, a plurality of wives. It is rather new ground for me, that is, I have not been in the habit of publicly speaking upon this subject, and it is rather new ground to the inhabitants of the United States, and not only to them, but to a portion of the inhabitants of Europe. A portion of them have not been in the habit of preaching a doctrine of this description. Consequently, we shall have to break up new ground. It is well known, however, to the congregation before me that the Latter-day Saints have embraced the doctrine of a plurality of wives as a part of their religious faith. It is not, as many have supposed, a doctrine embraced by them to gratify the carnal lusts and feelings of man. That is not the object of the doctrine. We shall endeavor to set forth before this enlightened assembly some of the causes why the Almighty has revealed such a doctrine, and why it is considered a part and portion of our religious faith. And I believe that they will not, under our present form of government, I mean the government of the United States, try us for treason in believing and practicing our religious notions and ideas. I think, if I am not mistaken, that the Constitution gives the privilege to all the inhabitants of this country of the free exercise of their religious notions and the freedom of their faith and the practice of it. Then, if it can be proven to a demonstration that the Latter-day Saints have actually embraced as a part of portion of their religion the doctrine of a plurality of wives, it is constitutional, and should thereafter be laws enacted by this government to restrict them from the free exercise of this part of the religion, such laws must be unconstitutional. But, says the objector, we cannot see how this doctrine can be embraced as a matter of religion and faith. We can hardly conceive how it can be embraced only as a kind of domestic concern, something that pertains to domestic pleasures and in no way connected with religion. In reply, we will show you that it is incorporated as a part of our religion and necessary for our exaltation to the fullness of the Lord's glory in the eternal world. Would you like to know the reasons? Before we get through, we will endeavor to tell you why we consider it an essential doctrine to glory and exaltation, to our fullness of happiness in the world to come. I'm going to end there. But was that not interesting? Like, he has a very interesting way of speaking, and he had a very organized way of expressing himself, probably way more than I am. But I really admire him as a speaker and as an educated person, someone who, well, I don't know if I would use the word educated, as an intelligent person, as a seeker after knowledge, yeah? Because even though he taught at university level, he never actually attended university. So, yeah. Like, that's even more remarkable, is it not? But I would not necessarily, like I like how they call him a scientist and not a mathematician. I'm not sure why that is. So I would say he's more of a mathematician than a scientist, but obviously science was part of it, yeah? A little bit of physics and astronomy. But it sounds to me like he did more mathematics myself. like just my opinion, as well as philosophy in this and theology, yes, but not necessarily science, like is a general rule. Anyway, all right. But I found that really, really fascinating, and I hope you did too, and I hope you learned something today. And if you did, please give the video a like and subscribe to the channel, and I hope to see you in the next video.